Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever poured your soul into supporting someone else, only to wonder if they truly see the person you are, the person you used to be, the person you could still become? This is a story about what happens when the background noise of a life becomes the main event, and a forgotten voice finds its power in the most unexpected way. It's the story of Clara, a woman who built a home for her family with her own two hands, sacrificing a brilliant career so that her husband, Mark, could build his. She had traded boardrooms for playdates, market analysis for grocery lists, her own ambition for his. She didn't resent it. She had chosen it out of love. But love can sometimes cast a long shadow, a shadow so complete that you can forget the shape of your own form. Clara believed Mark saw her, truly saw all of her. She believed their partnership was one of equal respect, even if their daily contributions looked vastly different. He was the breadwinner, the one battling in the corporate arena. She was the anchor, the quiet, steady force that made his battles possible. Or so she thought. That belief, the very foundation of her world, was about to be shattered by a simple, careless mistake. A single button on a smartphone, a button Mark forgot to press, would unleash a truth so cold and sharp it would threaten to sever the life she knew. It started, as many life-altering moments do, with a perfectly ordinary phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet, the children were at school, and Clara was folding laundry, the rhythmic snap of the sheets a familiar comfort. Her phone buzzed, and Mark's face, smiling from a long-ago vacation, filled the screen. She answered with the warmth that was her signature. "Hey you," she said, her voice a soft melody against the sterile silence of the laundry room. "How's the big day going? Are you ready to wow them?" Mark's sigh was heavy, 1,000 miles of stress traveling through the speaker. "Clara, it's a disaster. We're hours away from the presentation, and everything is falling apart. Richard is second-guessing the entire strategy. The numbers aren't lining up the way we projected. Mr. Harrison is breathing down my neck. I feel like I'm about to walk off a cliff." His voice was tight with a panic she knew all too well. This was the most important presentation of his career, a pitch for a merger that would either catapult his company, and him with it, into a new stratosphere or send them crashing into obscurity. Clara's heart went out to him. She stopped folding, giving him her full attention. "Mark, breathe," she said, her tone calm and reassuring, the one she used for scraped knees and childhood nightmares. "You know this material inside and out. You built the proposal. Trust your instincts. You are the smartest person in that room. Don't let Richard's anxiety infect you. Just be you. Be brilliant." She could almost feel him absorbing her confidence through the phone. He spoke of spreadsheets and market caps, of synergies and shareholder value, and while the terms were from a world she had left behind, she understood the language of pressure. She didn't offer technical advice, she offered strength. "Remember what we always say," she prompted gently. "One step at a time. Focus on the first slide. Then the next. You've got this." He let out a shaky breath. "You're right. You're always right. I don't know what I'd do without you, Clara." The words were a balm to her soul, a validation of her role. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you more," she replied. "Now go get them." She heard a faint click, but it wasn't the decisive snap of a call ending. It was a softer sound, the sound of a phone being placed on a desk. And then, the background noise didn't stop. It clarified. She was about to become a ghost in her own husband's life, listening to a conversation she was never meant to hear. Clara held the phone to her ear, her brow furrowed in confusion. A different voice, sharp and laced with a cynical, grating edge, cut through the ambient office noise. "Is she off the line?" it asked. It was Richard, Mark's colleague and, as Clara had always suspected, his rival. "Yeah, she's gone," Mark replied, his voice suddenly different. The warmth and vulnerability were gone, replaced by a weary, hollow tone that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Good," Richard scoffed, and the sound was like glass breaking. "Get your head in the game, man. We don't have time for a pep talk from the suburbs. Be brilliant?" "What is this, a high school play?" Clara froze, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, began to creep up her throat. She should hang up. This was a private conversation. But she was rooted to the spot, compelled by a horrible need to know. She's just trying to be supportive, Rich, Mark said, but his defense was weak, flimsy. It lacked conviction. Supportive? Mark, this is a $50 million deal. What does your wife, a woman who probably thinks market cap is a type of hat, know about any of this? Her biggest strategic decision of the day is whether to buy organic or regular milk. The laughter that followed was cruel and dismissive. It echoed in the silent laundry room, each chuckle a physical blow. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The room began to spin. And then came the words that broke her. It was Mark's voice, a strained, quiet admission. I know, he sighed. You're right. It's just. She doesn't get it. She lives in a different world, a different world. The world she had built for him. The world that allowed him to exist in his. The laundry basket slipped from her other hand, clothes spilling onto the tiled floor in a soft, mocking heap. She didn't notice. All she could hear was the casual, effortless way her husband had erased her, painting her as a simple-minded, naive housewife to appease his sneering colleague. He hadn't defended her. He had agreed. He had confirmed Richard's caricature of her. The numbness started in her fingertips and spread like a fast-acting poison through her veins. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was a profound, terrifying emptiness, the feeling of discovering that the ground beneath your feet was never solid to begin with. The conversation on the phone continued, a drone of business jargon and panic strategy, but Clara no longer heard the words. All she heard was the echo of Mark's betrayal. He saw her as small. He had packaged her up, put a label on her supportive wife, and filed her away, never to be consulted on matters of importance. The brilliant marketing strategist who had graduated top of her class, the woman who had once commanded boardrooms with her sharp insights, had been rendered invisible by the very man she had given up her own visibility for. She finally, slowly, pressed the red icon on her screen, and the silence that followed was louder than the conversation had been. She was numb. Utterly, completely numb. The numbness was a strange, protective shell. For a full hour, Clara sat on the cold laundry room floor, surrounded by the scent of clean cotton and the ruins of her perception of her marriage. The woman Richard had mocked, the woman Mark had so easily dismissed, was a fiction. But it was a fiction they had both, in their own ways, helped to write. She had willingly stepped back, and Mark had let her, perhaps even encouraged her, to fade into the background of his life. The different world he spoke of was a cage she had helped build, decorating it with love and sacrifice until she forgot it was a cage. But the door had just been blown off its hinges. As the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of her soul. It was a slow-burning fire, a forgotten heat. It was the ghost of the woman she used to be. She remembered the thrill of cracking a difficult market, of seeing patterns no one else could. She remembered the confidence, the power of her own mind. Mark thought her biggest decision was about milk. He had no idea. He and Richard were panicking because their strategy was flawed. She knew it was flawed from the few details Mark had shared over dinner last week. He had been so proud of it, this plan to merge with Sterling Corporation. He spoke of aggressive acquisition tactics, of absorbing their infrastructure and clientele. But Clara, even with her limited information, had felt a prickle of unease. Sterling wasn't a company you could simply swallow. They had a fiercely loyal, almost cult-like customer base. A hostile takeover wouldn't win them over, it would alienate them. It was like trying to conquer a country by insulting its traditions. You might win the land, but you would lose the people, which was the entire point. Mark and Richard were seeing it as a financial transaction. Clara saw it as a marriage. And you don't start a marriage by kicking down the door. The numbness in her veins began to recede, replaced by the electric hum of adrenaline, an old, familiar friend. The fire in her gut grew hotter. This wasn't just about saving Mark's career from his own short-sightedness. This was about saving herself. This was about proving, if only to herself, that Richard's cruel caricature and Mark's dismissive agreement were lies. She stood up, her movements stiff at first, then more certain. She walked out of the laundry room, leaving the scattered clothes on the floor. She went to the small home office, a room mostly used for paying bills and helping with homework, and sat down at the desk. She opened her laptop, the screen reflecting a face she barely recognized, a face etched with newfound, dangerous resolve. She wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a mother. She was a strategist. And a war was coming. The dining room table, usually reserved for family meals and homework projects, was transformed into a command center. By nightfall, it was covered in a chaotic mosaic of printed articles, financial reports she'd found online, and handwritten notes scrawled on napkins and the backs of envelopes. The soft, warm glow of the overhead lamp illuminated Clara's face, casting sharp shadows that highlighted the fierce concentration in her eyes. The house was asleep, a silent vessel holding her sleeping children and the life she was now fighting for in a way she never had before. For hours, she worked, fueled by coffee and a burning, righteous anger. Her mind, so long occupied with the logistics of family life, felt like a finely tuned engine roaring back to life. Every piece of data she found on Sterling Corp confirmed her initial intuition. Their brand wasn't built on slick advertising, it was built on community engagement, on a deep, authentic connection with their customers. They sponsored local events, championed environmental causes, and featured their own employees in their marketing. They were a company with a soul. Mark and Richard's plan to simply absorb their assets was an insult. It was a plan devised by spreadsheet jockeys who didn't understand the first thing about human loyalty. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind racing ahead. A new strategy began to form, not one of conquest, but of partnership. She didn't just scrap Mark's plan, she built a new one from the ground up, on a foundation of respect. She outlined a phased integration, one that would preserve Sterling's brand identity. She proposed a co-leadership structure for the first 2 years, a joint community investment fund, and a marketing campaign that celebrated the union of two distinct cultures, not the victory of one over the other. Her proposal wasn't just about numbers, it was about narrative. It told a story of two companies becoming stronger together, creating a new entity that honored the legacy of both. She titled the presentation, "The Alliance, a Partnership for the Future." It was elegant, it was powerful, and it was the truth. As the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and purple, Clara typed the final word. She leaned back in her chair, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical force. Her eyes burned, her back ached, but her mind was crystal clear. On the table in front of her lay not just a business proposal, but a declaration of her own worth. It was everything she was: insightful, strategic, empathetic. It was the part of her that Mark had forgotten. She printed out the 20-page document, the hum of the printer the only sound in the sleeping house. She collated the pages, her hands steady, and slipped them into a sleek black folder. She had done it. Now, what was she going to do with it? The early morning light streamed into the kitchen as Clara stood, the black folder clutched in her hand like a shield. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the coffee maker. The woman looking back at her was tired, her eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, but they held a fire that had been dormant for a decade. This wasn't the soft, accommodating face of Clara the wife and mother. This was the face of Clara the strategist, the woman who had just dissected a multi-million-dollar deal and rebuilt it on her own terms. She heard the shower turn on upstairs. Mark. In a few minutes, he would come down, dressed in his suit of corporate armor, grab a coffee, give her a distracted kiss, and walk out the door to fight a battle he was destined to lose. What was her plan? To meekly hand him the folder and say, "Honey, I had a few thoughts?" He would probably pat her on the head, thank her for the effort, and toss it in his briefcase unread. The thought was unbearable. The man who had dismissed her as living in a different world wouldn't suddenly accept a brilliant strategy from that same world. No, she couldn't just give it to him. This was bigger than him. It was about the truth of the idea itself. It deserved to be heard, not filtered through her husband's skepticism and pride. A wild, terrifying idea took root in her mind. It was audacious, unprofessional, and completely out of character for the woman she had been yesterday. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She made her decision in an instant. She would go to his office. She wouldn't confront him. She would simply deliver the folder. To whom? She wasn't sure yet. But she knew she had to get it into the building, into the ecosystem where it might have a chance to survive. She quickly dressed in an old suit she hadn't worn in years, a charcoal gray outfit that still fit perfectly. It felt like putting on a different skin, a reminder of the authority she once wielded. When Mark came downstairs, she was waiting by the door, coffee in one hand, the folder in the other. He stopped, surprised. "Wow, you're up early." And dressed. "Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with mild concern. "I have an errand to run in the city," she said, her voice even and calm, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. "I just wanted to wish you luck in person." She walked up to him, looked him directly in the eye, and gave him a kiss. It was different from their usual goodbye kiss. It was cool, deliberate, a kiss of farewell to the dynamic that had defined them for so long. "Break a leg," she said, her words holding a double meaning only she understood. Then she turned and walked out the door, leaving him standing in the hallway, looking utterly confused. She was on her way to his world, not as a supportive wife, but as an insurgent. The lobby of Mark's corporate headquarters was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make people feel small and insignificant. Men and women in sharp suits moved with hurried, self-important strides, their faces tense. Clara, clutching her black folder, felt a flicker of her old insecurity. She didn't belong here anymore. She was an outsider, a suburban mom in a suit that was a decade out of style. But then she remembered the conversation. She remembered Richard's sneer and Mark's sigh of agreement. The memory was a shot of pure adrenaline, stealing her resolve. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to disrupt. Her initial, vague plan was to perhaps leave the folder with a sympathetic-looking receptionist for Mr. Harrison, a long shot at best. As she scanned the bustling lobby, her eyes fell on the elevator bank. A name on the directory caught her eye. Arthur Harrison, CEO, 44th floor, the 44th floor. The top of the world. An impulse, born of desperation and newfound courage, seized her. She walked towards the executive elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she reached it, the doors slid open. And there, standing inside, looking grim and defeated, was a man she recognized from company newsletters. It was Arthur Harrison himself. He was older, with a mane of white hair and eyes that looked impossibly tired. Next to him stood Richard, his face a mask of smug anxiety, whispering urgently into the CEO's ear. It was a now-or-never moment. The universe had just presented her with an opportunity so improbable it felt like a test. She could shrink back, let the doors close, and retreat to her quiet life. Or she could step forward into the fire. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and fear, and stepped into the elevator just as the doors began to slide shut. The space was suddenly small and suffocatingly silent. Richard glanced at her, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. A nobody, an obstacle. Mr. Harrison didn't even seem to notice her. He was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. The doors closed, and the elevator began its silent, swift ascent. Clara knew she had only seconds. Her voice, when she found it, was shaky but clear. "Mr. Harrison," she said. Both men looked at her, startled. Richard's expression shifted from annoyance to outright contempt. Who was this woman to address the CEO? "I'm sorry to interrupt," Clara continued, her eyes fixed on Harrison, ignoring Richard completely. "My name is Clara Bishop. And I believe your team is approaching the Sterling merger all wrong." The silence in the elevator was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of its ascent. Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me? Who are you?" he demanded, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked at Clara's slightly dated suit, her earnest face, and dismissed her instantly. But Arthur Harrison didn't laugh. He turned his head slowly, his tired eyes focusing on Clara for the first time. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, not hope, but perhaps curiosity. He was a man on the brink of a massive failure, and sometimes, on the brink, you listened to voices you would otherwise ignore. All wrong, Harrison repeated, his voice a low rumble. That's a bold statement, Miss Bishop. What makes you say that? Before Clara could answer, the elevator doors opened on their floor. Just as they did, Mark stepped out of his office, his face pale with stress. He saw them, his wife, his boss, and his colleague, and froze. His expression was a kaleidoscope of confusion, shock, and dawning horror. Clara? What are you doing here? He stammered. Richard seized the opportunity. Mark, do you know this woman? She seems to have some radical ideas about our $50 million merger, he said, his tone mocking. The pieces clicked into place for Harrison. Bishop, he said, looking from Clara to Mark. This is your wife? Mark looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Yes, sir. I don't know what this is about. Clara ignored them both. Her audience was Harrison. She held up the black folder. Mr. Harrison, you're treating this like a hostile takeover. But Sterling isn't a company you can conquer. It's a community. Your strategy will acquire their assets, but alienate their customer base, the very thing that makes them valuable. You'll be buying an empty shell. Her words were direct, powerful, and utterly devoid of corporate jargon. They were simple, human truths. Harrison's eyes narrowed. He looked from Clara's passionate, certain face to Richard's sneering one, then to Mark's terrified one. He saw the dynamic instantly, the innovative idea being stifled by ego and fear. He had been complaining for weeks about the lack of fresh thinking, and here it was, standing in his hallway, in the unexpected form of a middle-aged woman in a gray suit. And you have a better idea? Harrison asked, his voice quiet but intense. Yes, sir. I do, Clara said, her voice ringing with a confidence she hadn't felt in a decade. It's in here. She held out the folder. Harrison looked at it, then back at her. In that moment, he made a decision. It was a risk, a wild departure from protocol, but the conventional path was leading him straight to disaster. He took the folder from her hand. The pre-briefing is in 10 minutes, he said, his voice firm. Miss Bishop, you're coming with me. Mark, Richard, you too. I want to hear this. The boardroom was an intimidating space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the nervous faces of the executives gathered around it. When Arthur Harrison walked in with Clara by his side, a wave of confused silence washed over the room. Mark and Richard trailed behind them, Mark looking pale and sick, Richard radiating pure, impotent fury. Harrison didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood, the black folder in his hand, and addressed the room. Gentlemen, he began, his voice cutting through the tension, there's been a change of plans. We are setting aside our proposed strategy for the moment. We are going to listen to a new perspective, he gestured towards Clara. This is Ms. Clara Bishop. She has a different approach to the Sterling merger, and I want you all to give her your undivided attention. Clara's heart was pounding. Every eye in the room was on her, a mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and outright hostility. She felt a tremor of fear, the old voice of self-doubt whispering that she didn't belong. Then she caught sight of her husband. Mark was watching her, his face a complex mask of shame, fear, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. In his eyes, she saw the stakes, not just for the company, but for her, for them. She took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. She didn't use the projector or the slides prepared by Mark's team. She just spoke, her voice growing stronger and more confident with every word. She laid out her vision not as a series of data points, but as a compelling story. Sterling Corp is not a target, she began. It's a partner. We have been so focused on what we can take from them that we haven't considered what we can build with them. She talked about their brand loyalty, their community, their soul. Then she unveiled her plan, the alliance. She spoke of co-leadership, of preserving their brand, of a joint vision that would create something new and more powerful than the sum of its parts. She wasn't just presenting a strategy, she was casting a vision. The initial skepticism in the room slowly began to melt away, replaced by rapt attention. Board members who had been slouched in their chairs were now leaning forward, nodding. They were hearing something they hadn't heard in a long time, a business plan with a human heart. When she finished, a profound silence filled the room. No one moved. Then, Arthur Harrison began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause, full of respect. One by one, the other executives joined in until the room was filled with a sound Clara hadn't heard directed at her in over 15 years, the sound of validation. The merger meeting with Sterling Corp took place 2 hours later. It was Clara, not Mark or Richard, who stood beside Mr. Harrison and presented the new vision. The Sterling executives, who had come prepared for a battle, were disarmed and then intrigued. By the end of the day, the deal wasn't just saved, it was transformed into a landmark partnership, celebrated on terms far more favorable than anyone had thought possible. Clara had not only saved the merger, she had redefined it. That evening, Clara returned home to a quiet house. She walked into the kitchen and found Mark sitting at the dining room table, the very table where she had staged her intellectual rebellion. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes were filled with a raw, painful remorse she had never seen before. He stood up but didn't come closer, as if he knew he hadn't earned the right. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears. I heard the whole thing. The call. Richard and me. I am so sorry." Clara simply looked at him, waiting. The apology was necessary, but it wasn't enough. "I didn't forget to press the end button, Clara," he continued, his voice cracking. "I think, somewhere deep down, I forgot who I was married to. I let the stress and the pressure and my own stupid ego make me forget that you were the most brilliant person I've ever known. I saw you as my support, my anchor, and I stopped seeing you as my equal. It was the biggest mistake of my life." The honesty in his words was disarming. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had gotten lost along the way. She walked over to the table and placed her hand on the polished wood. "You didn't just dismiss me, Mark. You dismissed a part of yourself, the part that knew a good idea could come from anywhere, even from a different world like ours." He flinched at her words, a direct hit. "I know," he whispered. "Today, in that boardroom, I saw you. I mean, I really saw you for the first time in years. And you were magnificent. You weren't my wife saving my job. You were a genius saving everyone's job. And I was just the guy lucky enough to be married to you." The next day, Mr. Harrison called her personally. Richard had been reassigned to a remote branch, his cynical worldview no longer welcome at the top. Then, the CEO made an offer that made Clara's heart soar. He didn't offer her a job in Mark's department. He offered her a newly created position, Vice President of Strategic Integration, reporting directly to him. He wasn't hiring Mark Bishop's wife. He was hiring Clara Bishop, the architect of their future. She accepted without hesitation. Her journey from invisibility to validation was complete. So let me ask you again, have you ever felt invisible? Or more importantly, have you ever made someone else feel that way? The greatest talents, the most profound wisdom, and the most brilliant ideas are often hidden in the last place we think to look, in the people we see every day. They are in our partners, our parents, our friends, the ones whose contributions we have started to take for granted. Their full potential is a treasure waiting to be rediscovered. Don't wait for a forgotten phone call to reveal the truth. Look at the people in your life, really look at them, and see them for all that they are. Remind someone today of the brilliant, powerful person you know they are. Because a word of recognition can be the key that unlocks a potential you never knew existed. Share this story if you believe everyone deserves to be seen.